There's a common saying that marriage is the grave of life. He, for one, would like to think differently, believing instead that getting employed is the true grave of life. The man muttered to himself about his current task, noting that he had to deal with 5 A-rank troll monsters and 4 basilisks, plus 3 S-rank Tyrant Dragons. These were all incredibly troublesome monsters, and he did not think he would be able to catch the last train home today either, thought Tanaka Makoto, a member of the Black Dog Guild. Tanaka added in his mind that even assuming he hurried to the dungeon right now, he would still finish well past midnight. He sighed heavily, trying to remember the last time he had actually gone home, feeling a deep desire to just sleep. 10 years ago, mysterious structures suddenly appeared all over the world, which people now call dungeons. Along with these structures came unknown creatures and unique weapons made with completely unknown technology. Because of this, people became explorers who went into the deep dungeons in search of hidden treasure. In the beginning, men screamed in shock as many died, because if they went into a dungeon without any protection, they would surely perish. However, along with the appearance of the dungeons, certain people with natural talents were endowed with special powers, making them dozens of times stronger than ordinary people. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, Tanaka had awakened to that special power himself. A trained voice announced that they would arrive in Shibuya soon. Nearby, a man muttered in surprise, noting that he did not know such monsters existed, and remarked on how nice it would be to try diving into a dungeon just once himself. The woman beside him replied, asking him not to do it, because it was far too dangerous, and he was not one of the awakened people. The man answered that he knew that already. The trained voice announced again that their exit was on the left side. Tanaka thought to himself that there seemed to be a highly popular dungeon exploration streaming trend on a video website called DTube. He guessed it was a very popular thing now to be a live streamer. Of course, he had never tried doing it before, as he had always focused his entire life on his heavy workload. He wondered briefly how much money those streamers actually got paid, but he told himself that he really did not know. At times like this, he painfully realized that he was getting old. Afterward, Tanaka arrived at the Shibuya underground dungeon. The staff worker thanked him and told him that his official registration had been completed, wishing him good luck. Tanaka put his identification card back into his pocket, stating to himself that it was now time to enter the dungeon. He stood directly in front of the massive entrance of the Shibuya underground dungeon, which was known as Onigaiwa. Tanaka suddenly muttered that he had almost forgotten something important. He held a small, round object in his hand and clicked a button on it. Instantly, the object began to float gently above his head. It was a small drone used for filming, a great device that takes video footage and automatically sends it straight back to his company. Depending on the settings used, the footage could also be streamed directly onto a public video site, though he only ever used it for reporting his required work quotas to the company. Tanaka mumbled to himself as he looked for the company's stream server, tapping carefully on his phone screen. Just then, he suddenly felt incredibly dizzy and crashed straight forward onto the ground. A nearby man immediately asked if he was okay. Tanaka replied that he was fine, explaining that he had just gotten a bit dizzy for a moment. The man stammered a brief reply, but he whispered to himself in his thoughts that Tanaka looked exactly like a moving corpse. Tanaka then began to climb down the stairs into the deep dungeon. He thought about his situation, realizing that he had only taken a short 2-hour nap today and had not been back to his own home for 2 full weeks. He wondered when was the last time he had actually rested to his heart's content, questioning what he was doing with his life. The company he worked for was a subcontractor for the government, which sounded highly respectable to outsiders, but it was actually not respectable at all. It simply meant that they were forced to do all the troublesome and dangerous things that even the government did not want to handle themselves. Because of this, their company was always completely filled with incredibly difficult work. Tanaka knew that at this rate, he would eventually die from severe overwork. However, he was always far too busy to even find the time to think about quitting his job. Today, once again, he dived deep into the dark dungeon with a completely dead look on his face. Tanaka noted to himself that his vision was getting blurry, but he told himself that the camera settings should be perfectly fine. Tanaka thought to himself that this time he would be diving into the Shibuya underground dungeon, which was known as one of the largest dungeons in Tokyo. Its deepest sections were exactly where he would be working today. Tanaka carefully tightened his necktie and declared to himself that it was now time to start his work. With that, he officially entered the dungeon. At this exact moment, he had absolutely no idea that because of today's dungeon dive, his entire life was about to change drastically. Meanwhile, some of the viewers online began to comment on the live video, wondering what was going on with the broadcast. One person pointed out that it was titled as being for company records, questioning if the streamer had accidentally selected the wrong privacy settings. Another person commented that it looked like a literal suicide stream, noting that the man clearly did not realize he was currently broadcasting to the public. Someone else added a warning, asking the others to hold on and pointing out that this was the dangerous Shibuya dungeon. They expressed deep concern about him going so deep into the area all by himself, wondering if he was going to be okay. Comments began to flood the chat rapidly, with people noting that a person would quickly die in such a large dungeon without bringing a party of at least 3 people. A viewer joked that the 3 of them were currently the only ones watching him, explaining that the channel did not usually do live broadcasts. Another viewer replied to ask if this was the official Black Dog channel, wondering if the salaryman in the suit was an actual member of the guild. Someone else commented on how dusty the place looked and noted that the man's name was not even on the official guild member list on the website. Another person replied that it did not matter because the man seemed to be in a massive hurry anyway. By looking at the video description, a viewer pointed out that the daily quota written, there was not an amount of work that a single person could ever finish alone. Another person loudly agreed, stating that they wanted to believe the numbers were just a typo, but if they were real, then the Black Dog Guild was an incredibly cruel and exploitative organization. As the chat filled with arguments about the guild's terrible nature, someone mentioned that they were going to tell other people on an online forum about what was happening, adding that they felt like they had seen this salaryman somewhere before, but could not remember where. Tanaka hopped from one massive stone to another with complete ease. The layout of the dungeon was divided into the upper, middle, lower, and lowest levels. Tanaka noticed his surroundings and realized that the deepest level was exactly what he was heading for now. He muttered that he had finally arrived as he stood right above a massive hole in the ground. Normally, proper exploration theory dictated that a person should go down the levels little by little, but Tanaka knew he did not have the luxury of time right now. Because of his tight schedule, he decided he would simply jump all the way to the bottom at once. Tanaka let out a heavy sigh, thinking about how depressing his life was. He admitted to himself that he desperately wanted to go home and sleep, and he wished he could just eat a warm meal. Tanaka glanced up at the floating drone to make sure it was still recording, feeling confident that the company president would never actually watch the raw footage, so he figured this minor shortcut would be perfectly fine. Tanaka grumbled to himself that he did not get paid nearly enough money, yet he was constantly expected to perform all of this highly dangerous work. He felt completely exhausted and knew he would be lucky if he could even get 2 short hours of sleep today. At the exact same time, the online viewers continued to comment on his broadcast. One person noted that if jumping down a hole was the only way the man could find time to sleep, then his guild was far too cruel and exploitative, adding that they could not even laugh at the sad situation. Another person told the worker to stay strong, while someone else added that the Black Dog Guild was actually violating the official Explorers Labor Standards Act. They declared that they would start recording the stream to use as evidence. Another viewer joked that they were going to spread the word online, laughing that today was going to turn into a massive corporate scandal. Someone else pointed out that the total number of viewers was growing rapidly, noting that there were only 3 people at first, but now there were 20, predicting that the stream could possibly reach 10,000 viewers soon. Suddenly, Tanaka gasped as his phone began to go off, wondering what was up with all the incoming calls. He knew he only had company contacts and a few old friends saved on this phone, and since he did not use any social media, he figured the notifications were not from that. That left him with the realization that these were all work calls. Tanaka told himself that if he actually answered the phone, he would only receive insults from his bosses, so he decided it was best to ignore the ringing completely. He figured he would probably get insulted at the office again tomorrow anyway, so he just needed to get on with his current task. Tanaka took a firm step forward, declaring that his destination was the lowest level. In the exact center of the Shibuya underground dungeon lay a massive well. If an explorer jumped straight down into that well, they could reach the lowest level in a single go. Without a single moment of hesitation, Tanaka jumped right off the edge into the empty air, telling himself that here he went. Of course, very few sensible explorers would ever attempt this because it was an incredibly dangerous act. Tanaka knew that if he did not have a stupidly high work quota to meet, he would never do such a stupid thing himself. Down in the video chat, the viewers screamed in shock, asking if he was actually falling. One person called it a literal suicide stream, while another shouted that he was going to die. People expressed how scared they were, wondering what the hell the salaryman was doing. While falling through the air, Tanaka turned his gaze downward. His phone began to vibrate violently once again, causing him to mutter that it was ringing quite a lot today. He decided it was probably nothing important anyway, and chose to ignore it as he continued to fall deeply into the darkness of the lowest level. Tanaka noted to himself that the drone was still following his movements closely. He admitted that he was still not used to being filmed, but since it was a strict company rule, he knew it could not be helped. He felt quite nervous about the recording, even though he believed it was only being saved for internal company records. He wondered to himself how truly embarrassing it would be if he were actually broadcasting to a live audience, mumbling that professional streamers were truly amazing people. He wondered if he would even get any comments from people if he ever tried to stream for real. Down in the video chat, the fast-growing audience continued to leave comments on the broadcast. One person pointed out that the man's face already looked completely dead. Another viewer called the video an incredible piece of footage and praised the available resources. Someone else let out a worried exclamation, wondering just how long the salaryman was going to keep falling through the empty air, laughing at the fact that he was still looking directly at the camera in a crazy situation like this. Another viewer commented that they had just come over from an online forum and asked the chat what was happening. A person quickly replied to explain that a man was currently falling down the central well of the Shibuya dungeon. Tanaka muttered a soft sound as he finally spotted the distant stone floor coming into view beneath him. He told himself that it was just about time to prepare for his landing. Out of nowhere, a dangerous monster suddenly appeared directly behind him in the air. Tanaka lifted his gaze upward to look at the threat. The creature opened its massive mouth wide as it tried to chase after Tanaka, releasing a loud and terrifying roar that echoed through the shaft. The online viewers reacted in pure shock, asking what kind of monster that was. A viewer replied that it was a red wyvern, noting that the creature was known for being pretty nasty even for highly experienced A-rank explorers. Someone else added that it would surely hurt to get bitten by those sharp fangs, concluding that the stream was over and noting that it had been a while since they last witnessed a death happen live on a broadcast. Meanwhile, Tanaka looked completely calm despite the danger. He noted to himself that it was just a red wyvern, feeling sure that it was merely a low-level monster. He figured the creature must have flown over simply because it thought he was an easy piece of food. The wyvern opened its giant jaw as widely as possible, waiting patiently for Tanaka to fall straight down into its throat. While still suspended in midair, Tanaka reached for his sword, holding the weapon firmly as he waited for the exact right moment to act. The wyvern continued to wait to eat him, but in just a single instant, everything changed. With one swift and powerful strike, the massive monster was completely sliced in half. Tanaka passed right through the falling pieces of the creature. He quickly straightened his legs and waited to hit the solid floor beneath him. A loud crash erupted through the dungeon as he finally landed on his feet. Right in front of him, the two heavy pieces of the dead wyvern crashed heavily onto the ground. Tanaka let out a tired sigh, muttering to himself that he had landed quite nicely. The thick cloud of dust created by his landing slowly began to clear away. Meanwhile, the online viewers were left in absolute shock, wondering what the hell had just happened. One person commented to ask if the dangerous red wyvern had actually just been split cleanly in half. Tanaka thought to himself that his legs felt quite numb from falling from such an incredibly high place. Down in the chat, a viewer pointed out that the salaryman was holding his sword, but they noted that he did not actually seem to unsheath the blade at all, asking how such a feat was even possible. Another person suggested that maybe the man was moving so incredibly fast that the camera's frame rate simply could not catch the motion. Someone else replied to argue about what the others were saying, stating that those kinds of movements were not humanly possible. Another viewer pointed out that the total number of people watching the stream had just surpassed 50,000 viewers, adding that the video was currently spreading like wildfire across social media and offering sarcastic congratulations. Feeling slightly annoyed by the distraction, Tanaka muttered that his phone was being incredibly noisy, wondering how many times his bosses were going to try to call him today. Just then, a heavy noise echoed loudly near his position. Tanaka mumbled to himself that the real work was finally starting as a group of large, towering monsters suddenly surrounded him in the darkness. He realized that things were finally starting to get interesting. Tanaka thought to himself that he was currently standing in the absolute lowest level of the dungeon. This was a highly dangerous area that was completely overrun by incredibly powerful monsters. He muttered the names of the creatures surrounding him, noticing a group of trolls, minotaurs, basilisks, and death knights, which were all known for being extremely hazardous. He also spotted a massive Tyrant Dragon. That particular beast was so tough and durable that he really did not want to fight at all, but he knew he had no choice because defeating it was written directly into his daily work quota. He told himself that it was now time to get to work, and he immediately charged straight toward the gathering monsters. The trolls let out fierce growls and rushed forward to attack him. Trolls possessed incredibly muscular bodies and terrifying faces, and Tanaka remembered that he had a very hard time fighting against them the very first time he encountered one in the past. However, things were very different now. Tanaka moved in an instant and sliced right through them, quietly saying the word there as he struck. The remaining trolls were completely stunned by his speed. While it was true that a troll was a highly durable monster that could take a lot of damage, Tanaka knew that if a person simply cut their necks cleanly, the beast would stop moving immediately. Because they possessed no special magic abilities, Tanaka actually considered them to be among the weaker monsters that appeared in the deep sections of the dungeon. In the next moment, the heavy heads of the monsters flew high into the air. Watching this happen live on the broadcast, the online viewers commented in absolute shock. One person questioned if the salaryman was serious, amazed that he could defeat a troll in a single hit. Another person argued that there was no way this footage was real, claiming that the video must be heavily edited. A viewer asked for confirmation if these creatures were truly considered A-rank monsters. Someone else laughed at how easily he had defeated them, wondering if trolls were actually strong monsters at all. In response, another viewer commented that even highly experienced A-rank explorers would normally have an incredibly difficult time fighting a single troll all by themselves, explaining the human explorers had to use special weapons and all of their wits just to survive. They noted that the trolls should have been highly troublesome opponents, or at least they were supposed to be for normal people. Then, another viewer commented that they had just joined the stream from social media, asking if the salaryman was truly an official member of the Black Dog Guild and letting out a curse of disbelief. Meanwhile, Tanaka was starting to look incredibly tired. He exclaimed to himself in frustration that people were really pestering him with endless notifications today, thinking about how he had already said multiple times that he was currently busy at work. Just as he was getting distracted by his vibrating phone, another massive monster slowly approached him from the shadows. The giant creature towered heavily over Tanaka's small body. Its angry eyes twisted around to stare directly down at him, and Tanaka looked up and firmly met the monster's intense gaze. Online viewers commented in absolute fascination, asking if the creature was a basilisk and noting that they had never seen one before. A person replied that it was incredibly rare and pointed out that there are not many videos of it alive. Another viewer said it looked completely terrifying and admitted they were never going to become an explorer because of it. Someone else added that even if they did become an explorer, they would probably never go to the lower or lowest levels, so they felt they would be perfectly fine. In response, a viewer explained that while normal ogres could be found in the lower levels, this particular monster only lived in the absolute lowest level. Another person added that the beast was especially dangerous because it could spew a deadly petrification breath that would kill anyone who failed to avoid it. Just then, a viewer announced in the chat that the stream had officially reached over 5 million viewers, celebrating that it had been a long time since the last big milestone. The basilisk let out a fierce growl as it faced its opponent. Tanaka thought to himself that the breath of this creature had the terrible effect of turning a person's entire body to stone, which meant it would be instant game over if he got hit. He noted that if a normal explorer suffered from this condition, their companions could easily use a special item to heal them. However, because Tanaka was a perpetual soloist who always worked completely alone, he did not have any companions to save him. He realized he needed to end the fight completely before the monster could breathe out its dangerous magic. Tanaka's eyes sharpened with deep focus. In a single instant, he drove his sword deep into its belly and slashed it open. The monster gasped in pain and crashed heavily onto the ground. Tanaka noted to himself that not many people actually knew about this, but the belly was the true weak spot of a basilisk. He also knew that if an explorer missed the target even slightly, the creature's petrifying breath would immediately spread everywhere. Down in the video chat, the viewers commented in amazement, with one person admitting they had absolutely no idea that was its weak spot. Another person joked about Tanaka's thoughts, asking what he meant by saying not many people knew, arguing that it was more like no one in the world knew. Someone else commented that they were starting to feel strange because they could not see Tanaka's fast movements at all. Another viewer called the display wonderful, asking who this person was and wondering if he was secretly a famous explorer. A person replied that overseas viewers were finally starting to join the broadcast, questioning just how many basilisks this guy had hunted in his life. They pointed out that an overseas streamer was currently hosting Tanaka's broadcast with a title declaring that a real samurai had finally appeared in Japan. Another viewer left a salute in the comments, noting that it was no wonder the stream now had more than 10 million viewers. Suddenly, Tanaka's phone began to vibrate violently yet again. He muttered to himself that the calls were being far more persistent than usual, noting that the phone had kept vibrating even while he was in the middle of his intense fight earlier. He knew that if he actually answered the call, he would only get insults from his bosses, so he naturally chose to ignore it completely. All of a sudden, an incredibly strong force appeared in the area. A massive dragon towered heavily over him, completely ready to launch a devastating attack. Tanaka sharply eyed the opponent, recognizing it as a Tyrant Dragon, which was a proud S-rank beast. The Tyrant Dragon possessed dozens of times the physical toughness and raw attack power of a regular troll. It was a highly powerful enemy that could breathe superheated air from its mouth that was capable of melting solid iron in seconds. The online viewers commented in pure horror, asking what was up with that massive dragon and pointing out that it was way too big. Another person added a frantic warning, shouting that the salaryman was going to die. Someone else asked if that was really a Tyrant Dragon, calling the situation impossible and stating they did not even know if a full S-rank party could defeat it. A viewer joked that this was a death notice for the mysterious swordsman, while another begged him to please just run away. Finally, a viewer pointed out in shock that they had just surpassed 50 million viewers, celebrating the massive milestone. The Tyrant Dragon's massive mouth blazed with intense, hot fire as it towered menacingly over his small body. Tanaka thought to himself that the raw firepower of the creature's breath was absolutely tremendous. He knew that if he allowed himself to get hit by the incoming blast, his body would be instantly burned to ashes, leaving not even a single piece of charcoal behind. He realized he had to act quickly to prevent that terrible outcome from happening. Meanwhile, the online viewers in the live chat were in a complete uproar over the extreme danger. One person commented for him to run away, while another stated that the salaryman was already a dead man. Someone else joked that the stream was trying to use advanced artificial intelligence effects now, calling the realistic video quality highly impressive. Another viewer added a frantic reminder that his current opponent was none other than the legendary Tyrant Dragon. A massive ball of bright flame gathered inside the monster's throat, and then the dragon shot the blazing fire directly toward him. Tanaka waited patiently for the exact right moment to move as he slowly unsheathed his sharp sword. Just a second before the destructive fire could hit him, he cleanly slashed the flying flame with his blade, and then he sprinted fiercely toward the giant dragon and sliced its entire body completely in half in one swift, fluid movement. The dragon's massive body froze in place for a moment as its tough flesh slowly split open, revealing that its torso had been precisely and perfectly cut down the middle. Tanaka stood firmly on the ground, watching the defeated monster collapse. At the exact same time, the online audience was left in absolute shock by the incredible feat. One person questioned how it was even possible for someone to defeat a legendary Tyrant Dragon in a single attack. Another person replied in amazement, asking who the hell this mysterious salaryman was and insisting that they needed to find his real identity immediately. A viewer wondered if modern swords were somehow capable of producing invisible shockwaves, but another person quickly replied that such a thing was obviously impossible. Someone else begged for someone to tell them that this whole video was just a fake edit, while another person joked that Japanese corporate warriors were apparently incredibly strong. A viewer laughed at the comment, combining the ideas to call him a corporate warrior and a swordmaster at the same time, suggesting that they should make the phrase popular online. Tanaka turned his quiet gaze back toward the rest of the battlefield and noticed that all the remaining monsters were suddenly taking a fearful step back away from him. Apparently, the Tyrant Dragon had been the supreme boss of all the creatures in the area. Now that their powerful leader was completely down, the remaining monsters no longer had any will to fight him anymore. Tanaka realized that if he bothered to defeat the rest of them, the dropped monster materials would just go straight to his company anyway. Moreover, since he had already officially met his required work quota for the day, he really had no remaining reason to keep fighting. Tanaka waved his hand and told the creatures to go on, letting them know he was letting them go free. Without a single moment of hesitation, the terrified monsters turned around and ran away as fast as they could. Tanaka let out a tired sigh, noting that he had finished his task much earlier than he originally thought he would. He decided he just needed to quickly gather up the specific monster materials required for his quota and finally go home to rest. Before doing that, however, he decided he should double-check his device, even though he really did not want to deal with it. Tanaka turned on his phone screen. He tried turning the device completely off and on again, desperately hoping that the massive flood of incoming notifications was just a temporary technical bug, but the alerts remained exactly the same. Tanaka gasped in pure shock, looking down at the screen to see a ridiculous count of 9,999 notifications. He knew that his phone had been getting hot from vibrating, but this massive number of messages was absolutely ridiculous to him. Tanaka then quickly opened up his phone to investigate. He wondered what the hell was going on as he began to read the top alert, noticing that he had received a live comment on the video platform DTube. Tanaka mumbled to himself in confusion, wondering why on earth he was getting DTube notifications on his private work device. Upon a sudden, horrifying realization, Tanaka let out a loud shriek of pure shock. He could not understand why there were public comments appearing on his video, panicking as he tried to figure out what was happening. He told himself to wait a moment, feeling pretty sure that he had manually set the streaming privacy settings to the company-only option. However, when he checked the screen, he saw that he was entirely wrong. Tanaka was completely shocked to discover that the public privacy setting was actually set to allow anyone to watch. His entire body froze in place as he realized he had completely missed the correct setting before entering the dungeon. He thought to himself in horror that everything he had done up until this point had been broadcast nationwide for the world to see. Even so, he tried to comfort himself by thinking that a random stream like his wouldn't actually get that many views. Tanaka clicked on his live video to check the official counter. He watched the digits climb past hundreds of thousands, a million, and then finally stop at over 100 million live viewers. Tanaka was completely stunned into silence by the shock. He knew that since he was simply using his company's basic work account, there were normally only about 2,000 subscribers attached to it, which was a number he could understand. However, in reality, the current viewership was way more than that, completely surpassing even the most famous professional streamers in the world. Most professional streamers did not ever get to 1 million live viewers during a broadcast, let alone reaching over 100 million views at the same time. Meanwhile, the online viewers in the chat room continued to comment rapidly. One person cheered that the salaryman had finally noticed the camera, while another replied that they were right here watching him and called his battles incredibly cool. Someone else joked about his earlier phrase, laughing at the way he had declared that his work was starting right before destroying the monsters. Viewers praised his strength, begging him to please tell them his real name. Someone else commented that the phrase corporate slave sword master was now trending heavily across all social media platforms. Another person begged him to please join their own explorer guild, asking how he had managed to get so incredibly strong. Tanaka thought to himself in deep despair that no matter what he said to the camera now, it was never going to calm this massive situation down. He realized with a heavy heart that he was definitely going to have to write a massive apology report to his bosses for this corporate disaster. The day after the massive stream incident, Tanaka holed himself up inside his home. He was trembling all over, realizing with deep dread that he had become a massive hot topic across the entire internet. His hand shook uncontrollably as he scrolled down the screen of his phone to check the updates. Tanaka clicked on the latest news articles to see what people were saying, muttering to himself as he checked the social media platform Twitter and read the endless comments left on his video. Overwhelmed by the situation, he finally threw his phone away from him. He thought to himself, wondering if this intense response was what people typically called going viral. Having spent his entire life doing nothing but working, he was completely unfamiliar with that kind of internet culture. He realized he desperately needed the advice of someone who actually knew how to use the internet well. Tanaka talked to himself, admitting that while he might be the only crazy person who routinely dived into the lowest levels of a dungeon completely solo, he still wondered if doing that was truly such a big deal. Because he only ever dived alone these days, he truly did not know the actual strength levels of other modern explorers. He had started diving into the structures as soon as the dungeons first came into the world 10 years ago, so he always believed he was pretty strong, but he never expected his skills to make such a shocking impact on the public. Tanaka mumbled, trying to figure out a possible reason for the chaos, and wondered if it was simply because he looked like an unappealing, ordinary salaryman. After all, he wore a standard business suit and looked exactly like just about every other office worker in the city. Plus, the dark circles under his eyes from chronic exhaustion were so bad that he definitely did not look like a typical hero or a professional explorer. Tanaka suddenly gasped as a realization hit him, finally understanding the truth. He realized that it was the extreme contrast between his boring appearance and his massive strength that was causing everyone to make such a huge fuss online. Suddenly, his phone began to vibrate violently from an incoming call. Tanaka instantly flinched in pure panic, springing up so high in fright that he felt like he hit the ceiling. He asked himself what kind of emergency it was this time. However, he hesitated as he looked closely at the screen to see the caller's identity. The person calling was Adachi, who was one of his few true friends from the past, though they had not hung out lately. Tanaka had been so deeply overwhelmed with his heavy workload recently that he had practically forgotten Adachi even existed. He felt absolutely certain that the sole reason Adachi was calling him at this exact moment was related to the video incident from yesterday. To be honest, Tanaka really did not want to talk about the disaster with anyone. However, he also knew that Adachi was the only friend he could actually turn to for help right now. Letting out a heavy sigh, Tanaka finally picked up the phone and answered. As soon as he spoke, Adachi shouted his name through the line, laughing loudly and declaring that he had watched the entire stream. Adachi found the whole situation hilarious and eagerly asked Tanaka how he was feeling now that he was famous. However, instead of answering, Tanaka immediately hung up the phone. On the other end, Adachi could only mutter in surprise at the sudden disconnection. Tanaka put his phone down on the table and stretched his tired body, telling himself that it was time to get ready for another regular day of work. Just then, the phone began to ring loudly once again. Tanaka let out another tired sigh and picked it up a second time, asking his friend what he wanted. Adachi quickly apologized, promising that he would not tease him anymore and begging Tanaka not to cut him off again while trying to stifle another laugh. Tanaka warned him strictly, asking if he wanted him to hang up the call a second time. Adachi quickly reiterated his apology, swearing that he would behave so that Tanaka wouldn't cut the line. Tanaka gave in, stating that Adachi was being a real pain in the ass, while Adachi thanked him for staying on the line. Meanwhile, Tanaka thought to himself that his friend was clearly still having a great time at his expense. To be honest, Tanaka knew he deeply needed Adachi's wisdom right now, and if he hung up out of anger again, it would only be his own loss. Adachi was naturally a very good talker who had always maintained a very wide circle of friends, making him highly familiar with social media trends. Because of this, Tanaka felt positive that Adachi could help him come up with a good solution to his problem. Adachi spoke through the phone line again, mentioning that he had watched the video and noting that Tanaka was still just as incredibly strong as ever. Adachi added that Tanaka's combat skills might have even improved since the last time they saw each other. Tanaka replied sharply, stating that he did not need any empty flattery right now, and asked Adachi what he thought he should do about the public exposure. Adachi echoed the question back to him, asking what he should do, and told Tanaka to tell him what he honestly wanted to happen. Tanaka muttered in response, thinking about what he truly wanted. He stated that he simply wanted to delete all the copies of the videos that were currently circulating around the internet. Adachi let out a short laugh and told him that it was completely impossible to do that. Tanaka exclaimed in surprise, demanding to know why it couldn't be done. Adachi explained that Tanaka's unparalleled battle skills had already been clipped and reposted by more than 100 or even 200 different channels. Furthermore, he noted that the clips had already spread rapidly overseas, appearing under titles that praise the arrival of a real samurai in Japan. Adachi added that he had just checked the statistics before calling, and the footage had already been translated into 5 different languages, telling his friend that he should just give up on trying to erase it. Tanaka spoke in deep worry, realizing that the situation had grown far beyond his control. He remembered that while he was streaming the dive yesterday, he had indeed noticed a large number of comments written by people from abroad. Accepting the reality of the situation, Tanaka finally told Adachi that he would give up on trying to delete the videos from the internet. Tanaka asked his friend if he could at least tell him how to keep the entire situation as controlled as possible. Adachi questioned what Tanaka was even saying, pointing out that he had become incredibly famous now and asking why he was trying to throw such a massive opportunity away. He added that Tanaka would likely never get another rare chance like this in his entire life. Tanaka shouted back in disagreement, asking his friend what he was talking about and arguing that he was not a professional streamer or a social media influencer. He insisted that he was just a regular salaryman and stated that being famous would not do him any good at all, groaning that the public attention would only result in his boss giving him even more paperwork and reports to fill out. As he stressed over the situation, Tanaka felt a sharp pain in his stomach, realizing that his body was apparently quite weak against mental stress. He noted the irony that his stomach had remained perfectly fine in the past after he accidentally ate an acid slime monster that was capable of melting solid steel, yet corporate anxiety was enough to hurt him. Adachi sighed through the phone and remarked that Tanaka had truly become a complete corporate slave. He told his friend to listen closely to his advice, suggesting that Tanaka should simply quit his job at the company altogether. Hearing this unexpected suggestion, Tanaka was left completely stunned into silence. Adachi explained that he had seen the live video broadcast and noticed that the dark circles under Tanaka's eyes were incredibly bad. He asked if Tanaka was probably still being heavily overworked by Suda for a terribly low salary. Tanaka replied that he could not deny that fact. Suda was the official president of the subcontractor company where Tanaka currently worked. Adachi, Suda, and Tanaka had all been classmates who used to play together constantly when they were in elementary school and middle school, making them childhood friends. Because of this long history, Tanaka felt that he owed quite a lot to President Suda, thinking that for him to suddenly quit the company would be a terrible betrayal. Adachi questioned this loyalty, reminding him that Suda had only lent him money in the past when Tanaka's parents became sick. Adachi pointed out that Tanaka had already paid the financial debt back in full and had worked endlessly to earn his freedom, stating firmly that Tanaka should finally start living for himself. Tanaka was left completely stunned by the advice, repeating the phrase in his mind and realizing that he had been so overwhelmed with daily work that he had never once stopped to think about his own happiness. He wondered silently if he was even allowed to live a life for himself. Adachi then guessed that Suda had most likely told Tanaka that if he ever chose to quit his current position, there would be absolutely no other job opportunities available for him anywhere else. Tanaka admitted that the president had indeed told him exactly those kind of words. Adachi scoffed loudly at the realization, calling Suda a completely corrupt president and warning Tanaka never to take his threats seriously. Adachi pointed out that there were plenty of professional explorer guilds that would happily hire him immediately. He added that Tanaka also possessed the option to go freelance if he no longer wanted to be tied down to a strict company structure. Tanaka countered this idea, reminding Adachi that they both knew freelancing did not bring in reliable money because he did not possess the official qualifications required to convert dungeon treasures into regular cash. Any items or monster materials that explorers obtained within a dungeon could not be exchanged directly into regular Japanese yen. A person had to first change the items into a special universal currency called G, which was short for gold, and only after that step could an individual officially exchange the gold into yen. However, the law required a person to hold a special legal qualification to perform this currency exchange. Usually, only large established companies held these valuable qualifications, while regular individuals did not. It was a highly tedious and complicated system, but Tanaka understood that if the government did not regulate the process this way, the massive influx of valuable treasures could easily completely tank the regular economy. This rule just went to show how valuable and expensive the rare items found inside the dungeons truly were. Tanaka knew that this law was not just a rule in Japan, as most other countries around the world used a similar strict currency system to protect their markets. Adachi clarified that he was not actually suggesting Tanaka go freelance. Instead, he explained that he was saying Tanaka should become a professional dungeon streamer. Tanaka muttered the phrase in complete surprise. Adachi enthusiastically confirmed the idea, explaining that it was exactly what the name suggested. Tanaka thought about the concept, realizing that a dungeon streamer was simply someone who broadcasted live videos of themselves diving into dangerous structures. He recognized that a person did not need to hold any special corporate qualifications to make money through online broadcasting, and he knew there were several famous streamers who seemed to be making an incredible amount of money doing it. However, Tanaka wondered to himself if he was truly up to the difficult task of entertaining an audience. Adachi reassured him, stating that while he was not forcing Tanaka to become one, he promised that if Tanaka ever decided to take the leap, he would support him to the absolute best of his ability. Tanaka's eyes widened in surprise at his friend's generosity. He remembered that Adachi worked for a successful company that specialized in supporting explorers, which meant he naturally possessed a great deal of knowledge about the inner workings of the dungeon streaming industry. Tanaka knew that Adachi was a genuinely good guy who had always been a highly reliable friend, feeling certain that Adachi would be able to guide him through the process if he asked for help. Tanaka replied that the offer was incredibly reassuring and told his friend that he was counting on him. Adachi smiled warmly at the response. On the other end of the line, Tanaka admitted that actually leaving his stable company was still something he could not really imagine doing. Whenever he thought about taking the leap, he became deeply hesitant, noting that being completely unemployed was far too heavy and frightening of a word for someone of his older age. Adachi told him that he really did not want to sound overly sentimental, but he admitted that he used to deeply admire Tanaka in the past. Tanaka asked in complete surprise if Adachi truly meant him. Adachi explained that he had always admired courageous dungeon explorers who went into danger and did their absolute best to survive. He revealed that when he watched Tanaka fight the monsters on the live stream yesterday, he thought to himself that if there were already such amazing, powerful people like Tanaka in the world, then he did not need to go diving into dangerous dungeons himself. Tanaka whispered his friend's name in quiet appreciation. Adachi continued his explanation, revealing that the exact reason he had entered the explorer support business in the first place was so that he could be ready to support a certain special someone someday. Tanaka asked who that mysterious person was, wondering out loud if he knew them. Adachi laughed softly and remarked that Tanaka had always been a bit slow when it came to understanding people's feelings. Adachi then concluded the conversation by telling him that if he was truly having such a hard and miserable time at his current corporate job, he should just quit immediately, promising that he would happily hire Tanaka to work as a waiter in his own company if things went wrong. Tanaka jokingly replied that if for whatever reason an offer to work as a simple waiter ever started sounding attractive to him, he must have severely hit his head on something. Adachi laughed and agreed, noting that it would have to be a very serious head injury to make him choose that path. He reminded Tanaka that since he had the incredible strength to completely defeat a legendary Tyrant Dragon, he surely would not lose a confrontation to someone small like Suda. Tanaka mumbled his agreement and thanked his friend sincerely, promising that he would get in touch with him again very soon before officially hanging up the phone. A short while later, Tanaka arrived at his workplace and waited silently inside the quiet office, glancing down at his watch to check the time. Suddenly, the loud sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, drawing closer and closer to the room along with the clear sound of teeth gritting in absolute anger. President Suda violently slammed the office door wide open to confront him. Tanaka glanced over in his boss's direction, remaining completely calm and collected despite the dramatic entrance. Suda glared at him fiercely and firmly called out his name, stating slow and hard that he truly hoped Tanaka was fully ready for the severe consequences that were coming his way. Two heavy-set men stood menacingly right behind Suda as the president stepped into the room. Suda angrily demanded to know if Tanaka fully understood exactly what he had done to the business. Tanaka touched his aching stomach and groaned silently to himself, realizing that just hearing the sound of Suda's voice was enough to make his stomach churn violently. He guessed that he truly was far more prone to mental stress than he had originally thought. However, thanks to his helpful phone conversation with Adachi earlier, he had managed to look at his current situation objectively. He recognized that if he had not spoken to his friend first, he might have completely surrendered to his boss at this very point. Suda continued his angry lecture, shouting that because of the accidental live stream, the company's professional reputation was completely in ruins. He demanded to know how Tanaka was going to take full responsibility for the disaster, warning him that the rest of the employees would be arriving at the office very soon, and he hoped Tanaka was fully prepared for the severe consequences that would follow. While listening to the familiar shouting, Tanaka thought to himself that, as per usual, Suda's actual management skills were nothing special at all. Unfortunately, it was only when a person was managing a cruel black company that things got really tough for the workers, and because of that toxic environment, both his mind and his body had become completely worn out over the years. Even though he felt he owed Suda a deep debt of past gratitude, Tanaka watched the president turn around and shout with extreme anger at his assistants. Suda ordered the men to tell the other employees that if they did not arrive at the office right this second, he would immediately cut their monthly pay. The assistant flinched in fear at the outburst and quickly agreed to obey. Tanaka reflected on the scene, realizing that he truly wanted to live for his own happiness from now on, and he knew he needed to firmly fight for that freedom. Suda loudly complained that being later than their own boss was completely unacceptable in the professional world. He claimed he was only teaching them these harsh lessons for their own personal good, telling them to remember that rule. The assistants quickly nodded in agreement. Suda shook his head in disappointment, muttering that all of his workers were completely hopeless. Tanaka noted silently to himself that Suda was always claiming to do things for the good of others, but that statement was a complete lie. In reality, Suda simply enjoyed lecturing people because he was a piece of scum who loved to torture individuals who lacked the power to fight back. Suda secretly grinned to himself, falsely sighing about how incredibly hard it was to be the company president. Tanaka felt glad that he was finally able to see through his boss's manipulation, but his stomach still churned uncomfortably just being in front of the man. Tanaka clenched his fist tightly, questioning whether he actually had the courage to argue back. Suddenly, his phone vibrated inside his pocket, looking surprised by the sudden interruption. He let out a fake cough to cover up the noise and opened up his device to check the screen, wondering what was up with the perfect timing of the message. He read a new text from Adachi, who joked that since Tanaka was a naturally timid guy, he was probably still feeling incredibly scared of Suda at this very moment, but Adachi expressed confidence that Tanaka could overcome that fear. After reading the encouraging text, Tanaka spoke out loud to acknowledge the situation, quietly saying that he understood and quickly offering an apology for the trouble. Suda snapped back, telling Tanaka not to speak to him like that, demanding to know if Tanaka honestly thought he would be easily forgiven just because he claimed to be not feeling well. Tanaka knew that Suda was a former dungeon explorer who was naturally much stronger than an average human being. However, Suda had not stepped foot inside a dangerous dungeon for a very long time, and Tanaka felt absolutely certain that he was currently much stronger than his boss. Looking closely at Suda's physical stance, Tanaka could see that the older man was completely full of open vulnerabilities. Suda grinned, assuming he had total control over the conversation. Before the president could speak another word, Tanaka imagined himself lunging forward in a split second. In his mind's eye, Suda's eyes froze in absolute shock, and before the man could react, Tanaka's powerful fist pierced directly through his boss's stomach with unregretful eyes. Snapping back to reality, Tanaka realized that it would take less than a single second for him to completely kill Suda if he ever chose to use his true strength. Suda noticed the strange silence and asked what he was thinking. Tanaka snapped out of his daze, realizing that when he truly thought about it, he was not actually scared of this man anymore, especially since the legendary Tyrant Dragon he had just fought was much scarier. Suda muttered a demand to know what Tanaka was staring at. Tanaka continued to think to himself, realizing he had only been scared in the past because he feared being forced out of the company. Now that he did not mind quitting the job at all, he had absolutely nothing left to be afraid of, and he felt confident that he could successfully handle this confrontation. All of a sudden, a group of male employees barged inside the office door, shouting loud apologies for being late to the meeting. Suda angrily shouted back, asking them what time they thought it was. The workers repeated their deep apologies. Suda smirked unpleasantly, stating that he would handle the latecomers' pay cuts at a later time. He then turned his full attention back to Tanaka, asking if they should finally start the lecture. Meanwhile, Tanaka only looked back at him in complete, silent calmness. Suda shouted at him to speak up, demanding that Tanaka state exactly what he had done wrong so that the other employees could understand the full scale of his mistake. Tanaka analyzed the situation in his thoughts, recognizing exactly how his boss operated. He knew that Suda first forced employees to explain their actions in front of everyone just to make them feel deeply guilty. After that, the president would intentionally interrupt them, completely shut them down, and take total control of the conversation. Once that psychological trap was sprung, the target employee would become far too intimidated to say anything else in their own defense. Tanaka concluded that the man was a genuine scumbag. Suda demanded that he go on and speak. Tanaka added to his thoughts that if this had been any other time in the past, he would have made the exact same terrified face as all the other workers. Instead, Tanaka calmly stated that he had made a mistake in his video streaming settings, which accidentally leaked the inner details of their daily work to the outside world. He openly acknowledged that the error was his own fault and admitted he was in the wrong. Suda grinned widely at the confession. Meanwhile, Tanaka thought about how, inside Suda's head, the cruel president could likely see a perfect path to breaking his spirit completely. Suda loudly agreed with the confession, shouting that what Tanaka did was extremely bad and demanding to know how he ever planned to financially compensate him for the damage. Tanaka thought to himself that while things might have always gone Suda's way until now, today was going to be completely different. Tanaka firmly added that while he knew the internet was currently giving the Black Dog Guild an incredibly bad reputation, the public anger was fueled by the company's own hidden actions, so he himself had nothing to do with that part of the problem. Suda's expression darkened instantly at the bold remarks, and he angrily questioned what Tanaka had just said. He fiercely shouted that Tanaka had everything to do with it, daring him to say those words to his face one more time. Meanwhile, the assistants standing right behind the president broke out into a nervous cold sweat from the intense tension in the room. Tanaka remained completely calm and replied that Suda was fully aware that their guild was a cruel black company, and that reality had simply come to light now. He pointed out that if the public was lying about things the company did not actually do, then it would be his own responsibility to fix it. Unfortunately, the things that became known to the public were the exact illegal activities they were actively doing every day. Tanaka stated clearly that Suda was the only one who had actually put himself in this terrible situation. Suda furiously retorted, demanding to know how Tanaka could dare to call his guild a black company. He loudly argued that they obviously were not an exploitative business, claiming that they properly paid every single worker the legal minimum salary, and even gave everyone one full day off from work every month. He angrily shouted, demanding to know who else would bother to pick up all the low-tier scum that other professional guilds refused to hire and give them steady work, declaring that he was the savior who did it. Meanwhile, Tanaka thought to himself that he would love to take a public survey to see how many normal people would actually think this was a well-run guild after hearing those exact illegal statements come out of a corrupt president's mouth. Tanaka then openly stated that Suda was the one actively embezzling the workers' salaries, and he pointed out that the number of days off given to the staff was far less than what was legally required by the official Explorer Labor Standards Act. He asked the president if he truly thought that no one would ever notice the crimes. Suda growled deeply in frustration and then completely raged out, shouting to the room, ask what if he was doing those things. He arrogantly claimed that since he personally did contract work for the government, he basically was the government himself. Tanaka was completely stunned by the sheer ignorance, realizing in his thoughts that his boss was a completely lost cause and that the corruption ran pitch black to the very core of this entire guild. He noticed that all the other employees in the room were slowly pulling away in horror, and he figured they would all probably quit the company very soon. Now that Suda had openly admitted to a large number of illegal activities, Tanaka knew it was finally time to reveal the hidden truth. Tanaka muttered that it was a real shame for him, calling out Suda's name. Suda angrily started to ask what he meant, but his words were cut short instantly. Tanaka explained that he had known the man for a very long time and knew exactly how he would react. He then clicked the visual button on his smartphone screen. Instantly, a bright holographic projection screen appeared in the middle of the room, showing a live broadcast of a completely shocked Suda. The president broke out into a heavy cold sweat, gasping in horror as he asked what the hell this screen was. At the exact same time, The online viewers in the live chat commented rapidly on the sudden turn of events. One person laughed that illegal quotes were coming out of the president's mouth one after another. Another viewer stated that they believed this situation had already officially become a serious police matter, calling it a true display of Japan's corporate darkness. Someone else added that things were getting incredibly heated up, noting it had been a long time since the internet last had such a hyped-up event. Another person mockingly asked the president how he was feeling right now. Suda nervously gasped, completely overwhelmed by the text flying across the screen. The viewers kept commenting at a furious pace, joking that this was a retirement speedrun that they much appreciated. One person left a message asking the corporate slave if he could see them, while another added that the company's bankruptcy was now officially confirmed. Viewers praised the salaryman for a well-thought-out plan, noting that now even the rich president could not get away with his crimes anymore. A commentator mentioned feeling a great sense of unity with the audience, celebrating that the brave man would finally no longer have to be a miserable corporate slave, though someone else joked that they actually thought the deep dark circles under his eyes were kind of cute. Finally, a fellow employee viewing the stream replied that they thought they would quit their job today as well. Tanaka read the public comments aloud from his screen, focusing on a message that praised his well-thought-out plan and noted that the company president could no longer get away with his actions. He explained to the room that the recording drone possessed a special camouflage mode, and thanks to that hidden feature, he had been able to live stream their entire conversation without the older man ever noticing the device. Suda reacted with pure fury, shouting that there was absolutely no way this could be happening. Tanaka continued his explanation, pointing out that the Black Dog Guild's official channel subscriber numbers had skyrocketed because of yesterday's accidental broadcast, meaning they would soon gather even more live viewers to witness the crimes. He told Suda to just give up and stated firmly that it was finally time for the corrupt boss to pay his fair share to the workers. Down in the fast-moving chat room, the online viewers commented with great excitement. One person cheered about how refreshing it was to see justice in Japan and encouraged Tanaka to go get his boss. Another viewer mockingly called out Suda's name, asking him exactly how he was feeling right at this moment. Someone else added a joke, stating that they had already eaten 5 whole bowls of rice because watching this corporate drama unfold was simply so good. Viewers began to call Tanaka the ultimate star and hero of all miserable corporate slaves across the country. Another commentator laughed out loud at the sight of the corrupt president being completely stuck in one place with no way to defend himself. A viewer added that they had already officially reported Suda to the Government Labor Standards Department, while another person replied that they had no idea today's massive internet hype was coming from this specific office. They laughed and stated that the downfall served the boss completely right, and someone else added that Suda's panic reactions to all the small details on the screen were absolutely hilarious to watch. Tanaka glanced back down at his phone screen and realized that an incredible number of people were actively watching the broadcast, feeling absolutely certain that social media was blowing up with the news at this very moment. He looked up at his boss and stated firmly that the game was completely over for him because too many people had just witnessed his corrupt behavior live. Tanaka questioned whether the president was going to try to use his usual threats and intimidation to sweep his crimes under the rug, pointing out that there was absolutely no way the older man could silence all 200,000 of the current live viewers. Suda gritted his teeth in pure frustration, staring back at Tanaka with an expression of intense anger. In Tanaka's mind, he knew there was nothing left for the man to do. He recognized that Suda usually ruled the office entirely through fear, and while the boss was sharp about using intimidation, that did not mean he was actually a clever person. Tanaka knew there was no way Suda could ever think of a logical way out of a massive public disaster like this. Shaking violently with intense rage, Suda called out Tanaka's name. The president then shouted loudly, demanding to know what Tanaka was trying to achieve and asking why he was doing this to the company. He fiercely questioned if this whole setup was a small act of revenge because of how heavily he had pushed Tanaka around over the years. Tanaka calmly replied that he would be lying if he said the thought of revenge had never crossed his mind, admitting that he had indeed wasted a massive amount of his precious life working under him. However, he stated that all of that hardship was completely in the past now and no longer mattered to him. Tanaka declared that it was time to finally get to the main issue of the meeting. Suda looked thoroughly confused by the statement, repeating the words back to him. Tanaka explained that the main point was that, from this exact day forward, he was officially going to live his life for himself. Because of that choice, he announced that he was officially leaving the company for good, even though he admitted he had not made any concrete plans for what he would do next. He figured he would simply go freelance or find another regular job sooner or later. Hearing this, Suda's angry face twisted into a mock smile, and he began to laugh out loud at the salaryman. He asked if Tanaka had completely lost his mind to think he could go freelance or find another job elsewhere. The president pointed his finger aggressively at Tanaka's face, shouting that he was a complete good-for-nothing who could never achieve anything in this world without his personal help. He insisted that there was absolutely no way another company would ever hire a worker like him. Suda then spun around, pointing back at the other frightened employees standing in the room, and shouted that the exact same rule applied to the rest of them as well. In Tanaka's mind, he found it completely hard to believe that he had actually stuck around this company for so long under the control of someone so miserable. Tanaka calmly told his boss that he saw his point, suggesting that they should find out right now whether he could successfully work somewhere else or not. Suda turned back toward him, angrily asking what on earth he was talking about. Tanaka looked directly up at the recording drone hovering near his back and asked the online audience if any of them would be willing to hire him if he officially left this guild today. Instantly, the livestream comment section exploded with responses from the most powerful organizations in the country. The famous Scarlet Wolf Guild commented immediately, telling him to come join their ranks right away. The powerful Gold Lion Guild countered the offer, begging him to join their guild instead and promising to pay him double the salary that any other group offered. The Elite Silver Cat Guild left a message stating that they would be absolutely glad to have him join their team, while the massive Obsidian Bear Guild asked if he would consider them, adding that a strong guy like him was more than welcome in their group. Even the Bronze Snake Guild joined the bidding war, promising that if Tanaka chose to join them, they would happily beat up his annoying garbage boss for him as a bonus. Tanaka's phone began to vibrate non-stop from the endless flood of notifications. He thought to himself, in absolute amazement, that there were so many offers coming in, noticing that several of the messages were from top-tier professional guilds that were normally incredibly hard for any regular explorer to get into. He had never experienced people showing this much intense interest or appreciation toward him in his entire life, and he felt deeply touched that they were all being so incredibly kind to him. While staring down at the glowing screen of his phone, he realized that the sudden kindness was completely overwhelming, thinking to himself that he was actually about to cry from happiness. Tanaka then pointed up at the holographic projection screen floating above them, telling Suda that the comments were his official answer. He stated firmly that he was no longer under his boss's control, and he warned the president that whatever cruel words he said would never work on him again. Suda gritted his teeth in pure, desperate frustration at the loss of control. He then shouted at the top of his lungs, demanding to know who it was that had originally brought Tanaka into his father's company back, when Tanaka was just a completely broke student. He fiercely asked who it was that had generously lent him a large sum of money to cover his parents' expensive medical bills in the past. The president declared that he was the savior who did all those things, accusing Tanaka of completely betraying him after everything he had ever done for his well-being. Tanaka looked at him and replied quietly that he had already paid back every single cent of that financial debt. Furthermore, Tanaka pointed out that Suda was actually the one who had betrayed their bond, explaining that he had always genuinely hoped they could achieve great things together as friends. Upon hearing those words, Suda fell completely silent. In the next moment, the older man suddenly began to move his hands toward his desk. Tanaka looked on in deep confusion, and the assistants standing nearby were thoroughly confused by the sudden change in behavior as well. Suda reached deep into his personal desk drawer. Tanaka was completely shocked by the action as Suda gripped a solid object hidden inside, muttering angrily for him to just shut up already. Suda then violently drew a sharp blade out into the open air, calling Tanaka an ungrateful piece of scum. The assistants standing in the room screamed out in pure terror at the sight of the weapon, while Tanaka watched the blade come toward him, thinking to himself in complete disbelief that his boss was seriously trying to attack him. The two assistants standing behind the desk watched nervously as Suda held his sharp sword and shouted in a complete rage, calling Tanaka a terrible ingrate. Meanwhile, Tanaka remained completely calm and collected as he stared down the blade. He recognized that the knife was a specific model used in dungeons that possessed incredibly high lethality. Tanaka thought to himself that if a person took a weapon like that completely out of the dungeon environment, they would be strictly breaching the official Dungeon Management Act. Suda grinned maliciously, telling Tanaka to prepare to die as he gripped his weapon with both hands. Without a single moment of hesitation, the furious president lunged directly at Tanaka. Tanaka's eyes narrowed into a sharp focus as Suda closed the distance between them, shouting Tanaka's name with absolute fury. Suda kept his grin wide, while the other employees in the room stood completely frozen in place, their jaws dropping in pure shock and panic at the sudden violence. Yet Tanaka remained entirely calm, thinking to himself that his boss was moving incredibly slow. Suda moved far slower than the fast monsters that regularly appeared in the lowest levels of the dungeon. Tanaka realized that while the president should have been much stronger in the past when he was an active explorer, Suda was now completely out of shape and corrupted by his lazy lifestyle. Tanaka smoothly raised his bare hand, and with one incredibly swift motion, he easily deflected Suda's incoming sword attack. Suda was instantly stunned into absolute shock as the force of the deflection severely deformed his hand. He shouted out in sudden agony, his entire body trembling violently as he experienced excruciating pain from the impact. Tanaka looked down at him and calmly told Suda that it was all over, mentioning that the corrupt man should finally learn a little bit about true human pain. Suda gritted his teeth in agony, trying to call him a bastard, but before he could even complete his words, Tanaka's powerful fist landed directly against his stomach. In an instant, the immense force sent Suda's body flying backward through the air as his heavy body crashed violently onto the office table, breaking the wooden furniture completely into pieces. Red blood splattered out from his mouth. The remaining employees froze in absolute horror as Suda's body continued to fly across the room, slamming hard against the solid wall and leaving deep cracks in the plaster before he finally collapsed into a heap onto the floor. Tanaka released a long, deep sigh of relief, stating out loud that he felt much better now. He thought to himself that he had made sure to go quite easy on Suda during the strike so that the older man would definitely not die from the injury. He truly hoped that Suda would finally learn a good lesson from his physical defeat. Tanaka turned around and began walking casually toward the office exit, but Suda suddenly called out his name from the floor in a raspy voice. The president gasped out that he would never forgive Tanaka for what he had just done. Tanaka said to himself that Suda was indeed a tough former explorer, recognizing that even though the man was incredibly corrupt, his fighting spirit had not been completely broken yet. He guessed that Suda's massive mountain of personal pride simply would not allow him to stay down quietly. Suda muttered with pure, burning fury that Tanaka had completely humiliated him in front of his workers. Tanaka thought inwardly that if he chose to attack the older man even one more time, Suda's actual life might be put at serious stake, which made the situation increasingly difficult to handle. Suda then turned his head toward his assistants and shouted at the top of his lungs, demanding to know what the hell they were doing. He ordered them to immediately kill the criminal who had just raised his hand against the company president. Suda clicked his tongue in deep disgust, screaming that all of his workers were completely useless. He then pointed a finger directly at one specific young man, shouting that he did not care how it was done, but the man needed to stop Tanaka right now, or he would immediately cut his monthly salary to zero. The young man gasped nervously at the severe threat. Meanwhile, Tanaka thought about the worker's background, remembering that he was a person who had just joined the company last year as a highly promising young employee. Because the two of them had never actually gone into a dungeon together before, Tanaka did not know exactly how skilled the young man was at fighting. Suda grinned wickedly from the floor, taunting the worker by saying that he would be in deep trouble if his pay stopped completely, and reminding him that he would be entirely unable to find work anywhere else in the dungeon industry if he got fired. Suda warned him that he surely did not want that terrible outcome to happen. Feeling incredibly nervous and pressured, the young employee quickly replied that he understood. Then, he slowly took a careful step forward toward the exit. He looked at Tanaka with an apologetic expression and gently told him that he was truly sorry, explaining that he would just try to hold him down to satisfy the boss and promised he would not hurt him in the process. Tanaka replied with a calm smile, telling the young man that it was perfectly fine and inviting him to go ahead and try. The young worker muttered a quick word of thanks as he firmly raised his hands and stood directly into his professional fighting stance. The young employee lunged directly toward him. While the attacker moved, Tanaka calmly analyzed the strategy in his thoughts, realizing that the man was aiming low for his legs to knock him over and gain the upper hand. He noted that if a person wanted to safely subdue an opponent without causing major injury, this was a very good tactical move. The young man's hands moved closer and closer to his legs, and the worker triumphantly thought to himself that he successfully had him trapped. Tanaka muttered inwardly, however, that the man's true intentions were being clearly shown in his physical movements ahead of time, making him far too slow to succeed. Tanaka smoothly raised his hand and struck the young man's head in one swift, fluid moment, firmly slamming him against the solid floor. Red blood spurted out from the worker's nose as the impact caused him to instantly lose consciousness. Tanaka then carefully dragged the unconscious young man over to the wall to rest, all while narrowing his eyes to glare over at Suda. Suda gritted his teeth in pure fury at the sight, muttering to himself that the young employee was completely useless and swearing that he would not let the failure get away with just a simple salary cut. Tanaka looked back at his boss and told Suda to give up already, reminding him that this entire violent encounter was still being actively streamed live to the public. Suda shouted back in denial, telling him to shut up and declaring that he had personally grown this company to its current successful size all thanks to his own hard work. He screamed that he was absolutely not going to let Tanaka destroy his life's work, loudly ordering his final assistant, Guda, to go get him. Guda remained completely silent as he took a firm, deliberate step forward toward Tanaka. Tanaka thought to himself about the new opponent, recognizing that Guda was completely unlike the previous young worker. Guda was a genuinely strong explorer who officially held a highly respected A-rank explorer license, which was exactly why Suda relied on him so heavily to handle the company's toughest problems. Guda was actually Tanaka's junior in the industry, but because they had dived into dangerous dungeons together a few times in the past, Tanaka knew the full extent of Guda's impressive physical abilities. He realized that this man would definitely not be as easily defeated as the previous employee. Suda shouted out once again, bloodthirstily ordering Guda to completely kill him. Tanaka wondered to himself how he should properly deal with this stronger opponent without causing too much destruction. Guda leaned in close to him and quietly whispered that he saw Tanaka was finally quitting the company, offering his sincere congratulations on the choice. Tanaka watched him with a completely stunned expression, utterly surprised by the friendly words. Guda softly told him that he had always personally thought that Tanaka did not belong in a miserable company like this, stating that an elite warrior like him deserved to be fighting on a much grander stage in the world. Tanaka replied in quiet surprise, offering a hesitant word of thanks. He then reflected in his thoughts, remembering that whenever they had dived into the dungeon together in the past, Guda had barely spoken a single word. Because of that quiet behavior, Tanaka had always assumed that Guda secretly hated him, but he realized now that was clearly not the case at all. Meanwhile, Suda trembled violently in pure anger, demanding to know why Guda was wagging his tail like a loyal dog at a piece of scum like Tanaka. Guda slowly turned his head and threw the president a freezing, terrifying glare that caused Suda to gasp out in sudden shock. Guda then stated firmly that Tanaka was his respected senior, who had personally taught him all the important basics of being a professional explorer. He declared that no matter how much money Suda was willing to offer him, he would never listen to orders to attack him. Furthermore, Guda pointed out the reality of their strength difference, explaining that if he were to seriously attack Tanaka, he would be the one ending up on a deathbed. He coldly suggested that the president should handle his own fights. Suda clenched his teeth tightly against the rising fury of being abandoned by his strongest worker. Tanaka thought to himself that he did not think Guda was being entirely accurate, believing that Guda was actually skilled enough to put up a very good fight against him if they truly battled. Just then, Guda told Tanaka that he would personally hold back the furious president, instructing his senior to please go on ahead and escape the office. Tanaka gasped in surprise, asking if he was seriously willing to do that. Guda confirmed the plan, telling him to please leave the room to his care. Tanaka then warmly patted his junior's back and thanked him for the unexpected help. Meanwhile, Suda gritted his teeth in complete, helpless frustration. Tanaka thought to himself that he could finally bid this awful company a permanent goodbye. However, just before his hand could reach the metal doorknob to exit, the office doors suddenly sprang wide open from the outside, and a stern-faced woman marched directly into the room. Everyone in the office was instantly stunned into silence by the sudden intrusion. The woman called out to the room, ordering nobody to move, and officially announced that they had received a serious public report and were members of the audit section of the association's management bureau. Suda shouted out in sudden surprise upon hearing the name of the department, repeating the phrase, an audit section, before letting out a short, arrogant laugh. He mockingly told Tanaka that the tables had completely turned now, loudly ordering the official government workers to quickly catch the criminal in the room. The president pointed aggressively at Tanaka, declaring that he was the sole culprit who had violently raised his bare hands against his boss. Tanaka analyzed the arriving group in his thoughts, recognizing the association's management bureau as an internal department of the Ministry of Monster Control, which meant they were a powerful government organization. He felt absolutely sure that the bureau had received a direct public report from a concerned online viewer who was currently watching the live broadcast from home. To Tanaka, it was entirely obvious why Suda was getting reported to the authorities, considering the corrupt boss was carrying out his illegal actions right under the open sun for everyone to see. Suda continued to shout at the group, ordering them to hurry up and do their official duty by arresting Tanaka. However, in a sudden twist, the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room as Suda's own wrists were firmly secured. One of the officers told him to calmly come along with them. Suda immediately screamed out in absolute shock, telling them to wait a second and demanding to know what the hell they were doing. He fiercely argued that Tanaka was the actual culprit of the violence, tightly clenching his teeth in pure frustration. The lead woman interrupted his shouting, addressing him formally as Suda Akihiro and announcing that he was officially being placed under arrest for directly violating the Explorer Labor Standards Act and the Awakened Special Act. Suda could only scream out that this outcome was completely impossible. Tanaka reflected on the arrest to himself, noting that Suda truly had no valid excuses left to give because his criminal actions and words had just been streamed completely alive to the public. Rather, Tanaka wondered how his boss could have ever thought his behavior was going to be okay in the first place. Suda broke out into a heavy, cold sweat, continuously mumbling that he could not believe this was happening to him. Tanaka thought that after seeing the endless abuse Suda had committed over the years, it was highly possible the president had simply misunderstood reality because his tyrannical behavior toward his workers had gone unpunished for so long. But this moment officially marked the total end of his corporate reign. Suda shouted out once again, begging the officers to wait and arguing that if anyone truly deserved to be arrested today, they should have arrested Tanaka instead. He claimed that Tanaka had used extreme physical violence against him, falsely describing himself as an innocent civilian that the Explorer was legally supposed to protect. The lead woman turned her head to glance over at Tanaka, letting out a very heavy, tired sigh. She acknowledged that the Awakened Special Act did indeed strictly prohibit any awakened individual from using their supernatural powers outside of a dungeon without explicit official permission, especially when using that power against ordinary citizens. Hearing this, Suda smugly agreed, telling her that she finally saw the truth of the situation. Meanwhile, Tanaka explained the concept to himself and his thoughts, noting that an awakened was a human being who had successfully gained special physical powers due to the sudden global appearance of the dungeons. Apparently, this awakening process occurred whenever a strange substance called magic essence, which floated inside the dungeons, deeply entered a person's physical body. While the ultimate strength of the awakening depended entirely on the individual, whether a person's body successfully awakened at all depended heavily on their innate genetic characteristics. Once a person became fully awakened, their supernatural power could unfortunately be wielded outside the safe dungeon environment as well, which was exactly why the government strictly restricted the use of power through the Awakened Special Act. Suda continued to shout loudly that he was the true victim of the encounter, begging the officials to quickly catch his ungrateful employee. The woman spoke back firmly, telling the president to make absolutely no mistake about the legal reality. She explained that Tanaka's physical actions fell perfectly within the legal category of basic self-defense. She noted that if Suda were a normal, unawakened human being, Tanaka's strike might have been considered excessive self-defense by the courts. However, because both of the men in this room were officially registered as awakened individuals, Suda was overwhelmingly to blame for the entire fight because he had aggressively made the first move and had even pulled out a lethal dungeon weapon to attack. Suda gasped out in horror, asking her what she had just said. Tanaka muttered to himself in relief, realizing that since Suda was once an active dungeon explorer in his youth, he was indeed considered an awakened person under the law. Because of that fact, Tanaka realized he would happily not face any legal punishment under the Awakened Special Act, feeling glad for once that Suda possessed supernatural traits. The lead woman then added that with the basic explanation out of the way, she was afraid she would still need Tanaka to accompany them to the public office to fill out a standard report. She addressed him directly by his full name, asking if Tanaka Makoto understood the request. Tanaka quickly replied that he understood, but he thought to himself that having to travel all the way to the government building was going to be a massive, exhausting pain. He stared closely at the woman's face, wondering why her appearance seemed so incredibly familiar to him. Tanaka suddenly asked if she was, perhaps, a person named Amatsuki. The woman sighed softly, asking him if he was truly only noticing her identity just now. Tanaka added a shocked realization to his thoughts, recognizing that because he had not seen her for an incredibly long period of time, he had failed to recognize her adult face at all, feeling deeply impressed by how beautifully and successfully she had grown up over the years. Just then, Suda screamed out in absolute terror, repeating her full name and asking if she was truly the famous Amatsuki Kanade. He fearfully questioned what the legendary chief of the official dungeon subjugation unit was doing personally visiting a small subcontractor office. Amatsuki looked down at him and explained coldly that whenever a criminal offender was a registered awakened individual, a high-ranking member from the elite subjugation unit was legally required to be physically present during the official arresting process. She added that this strict rule existed because in the high likelihood that a powerful offender tried to violently escape, normal police officers would possess absolutely no physical ability to chase or catch them. Suda yelled out in a frantic panic, stating that he fully understood the law, but still could not comprehend why a top government official like her would come out to a small office like this. He He desperately argued that surely the things he had done were not severe enough to warrant her personal presence. Tanaka agreed completely with that thought to himself, recognizing that the massive crimes Suda had committed were actually far worse than his boss realized. Even so, he felt that Amatsuki coming all the way out here was certainly strange just to deal with an ordinary, small-time corporate criminal like Suda. Tanaka knew that Subjugation Unit 1 was a highly elite division within a Monster Subjugation Bureau, operating as a powerful internal department of the Ministry of Monster Control that usually only handled extreme national emergencies. All the members of that elite unit were incredibly skilled, awakened individuals. Whenever dangerous monsters suddenly appeared inside the city streets, these professionals would deal with them quickly, and they were also highly active in chasing down and arresting dangerous, awakened criminals. Amatsuki Kanade was the official chief of Subjugation Unit 1, which meant she was the absolute top official in the entire department. She was incredibly strong, highly smart, and to top it all off, she was a stunning beauty. Because of these traits, she was considered the brightest rising star of the Ministry of Monster Control. The fact that she was much younger than him and already held the high rank of chief just went to show how remarkably talented she really was. In the past, the two of them used to go dungeon diving together quite often, and they had naturally gotten much closer with each successful dive. Now, on one hand, she had become a top-tier elite official, while on the other hand, he had spent years as a miserable corporate slave. Amatsuki spoke to the room, explaining that there was no deep hidden meaning behind why she was personally here today. Tanaka thought to himself about their paths, wondering how the gap between their social statuses had managed to become so incredibly large over the years. Amatsuki added that she simply happened to be the specific officer available to handle the call today. At the same time, Tanaka doubted the explanation inwardly, knowing that Amatsuki was supposed to be a quite busy woman. He wondered if her excuse was actually true, or if she had perhaps traveled all this way just to see a certain someone. Suddenly, their eyes met directly across the quiet office, causing Amatsuki to freeze up completely for a second before she quickly turned her face away. Tanaka was left looking completely stunned by the reaction, wondering if she secretly hated him now. Amatsuki then loudly ordered her assistants to take the criminal away immediately. The two large men quickly replied in agreement and grabbed the boss. Suda screamed frantically as he was being dragged out, loudly declaring that he was the president of the company and demanding that they let him go free. He shouted back into the room, calling out Tanaka's name and screaming that he was absolutely not going to let him get away with this betrayal. He warned Tanaka to remember this day, swearing that he would avenge his humiliation one day in the future. Suda's angry shouts echoed loudly all across the building's hallways as he kept promising that he would definitely get his payback. One of the guards shouted back at him to be quiet, warning the screaming man to stop resisting the arrest or he would immediately tighten the metal handcuffs. Suda kept yelling, asking them if they knew how much money he paid in annual taxes and arguing that he was the one practically paying all of their government salaries. Tanaka let out a tired sigh, thinking to himself that Suda was truly full of annoying energy until the very end of his reign. Anyway, he felt glad that the massive fuss concerning his official resignation had finally come to an end. Amatsuki called him by his first name, Makoto, and stated that she would like to officially hear his side of the entire story as well. She noted that he would be voluntarily accompanying her department back to the public office. Tanaka replied by asking if they could please do that at a later time, explaining that he had not been able to sleep properly for these past few weeks and was currently at his physical limit. Before Amatsuki could finish speaking her response, Tanaka casually threw a small black business card directly toward her. With a highly surprised expression on her face, she quickly caught the flying card right between her fingers. Tanaka thought to himself that if the officer had been an unknown government official, he would have behaved and accompanied them right away, but he felt sure that Amatsuki would be fine with handling a tiny bit of pampering from an old friend. Before walking away, Tanaka told her that he would definitely talk to her later, instructing her to just contact the phone number printed on the card. After saying goodbye, and without giving it a single second thought, Tanaka suddenly hurled his body directly out of the open office window, plummeting straight down from the great heights of the building. Amatsuki quickly rushed over to the window ledge to look down, shouting out loudly that she had actually come all this way just to see him. Tanaka glanced back up at her as he rushed through the air, wondering if she had just said something to him. He quickly dismissed it, figuring it was probably just his tired imagination playing tricks on him. He felt that Amatsuki was now a distant memory to him, deeply doubting that they would ever go into dangerous dungeons together again like they used to do in the old days.